Welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Getting near the big turkey day, big Thanksgiving. And we got Ray Russell of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. It's like a cornucopia. Hey, you guys know what a cornucopia is? Let me show you. I'll show you a cornucopia. I made one for the holiday. Hold on. You see? It's got candy in it. It's got mince. It's got your grandmother's mince pie. It's got... Oh, for the love of... this one pinches even worse than usual. Well, it's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hey, hand me that Tootsie Roll midge. Welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. I'm Bob Smith. You may remember me from Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a whole slew of other wrestling magazines. How are you today? Our guest, and we're going to have as much of a free-form conversation as I've ever had on the show, and I like him that way. It's going to be Ray Russell, the head of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. I'm in cahoots, and we're going to talk about everything under the sun. That's it. I don't have a theme coming into this one, and I like him this way. I really do. He's a great podcaster in his own right, and I'm sure he'll have a lot of really interesting things to say. But so you better stick around and listen to what we got in store for you. So let's make it quick. Here's a quickie public service announcement about what the WrestleCopia Podcast Network has going on, and then we'll get right on with things. All right? Stay there, will you? Get a nice beverage. How about that? Hot or cold? It's that kind of year, you know. Maybe there's a chill in the air. You want to warm yourself up, or just have a succulent, caffeine-free Diet Coke. Guess which one I drink all the time? See you in a few. Well, as so many of you know now, the Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. And things are going along swimmingly, and their shows are getting hotter all the time. Let's take a look at what's been going on. First off, I think I mentioned this on a previous show, but I want to make sure you know it. Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert is now, drumroll please, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich on every episode. So that's two of the biggest stars in NWA and Memphis history on the same podcast all the time. Here's a look at more of the WrestleCopia podcast productions. How about the Wrestling Memory Grenade? Every episode takes a look back at a moment in wrestling history with our good friend Ray Russell. Retro Wrestling Review. A recent episode takes a look at USWA from 1993 and Papa Shango and that whole scene. You're going to want to check out all of those podcasts, including the Other Shit podcast. You never know what that wacky bunch is going to talk about on that show. And it's a really good one, and it's one of the most unique wrestling podcasts you'll ever listen to. There's the Outdated Wrestling Hour with some old fart babbles on. It's ridiculous. Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty has been on quite a hot streak as of late. Tons of superstar wrestlers have been on the show. Recently, they had Baron Von Raschke, Jerry Oates, and you name it, they've been on it. Don't miss the Regional Wrestling Podcast. Every episode is a look back to a particular period in that history. Really interesting podcast is DJ's Puro Wrestling Academy, which looks back at Japan and wrestling from the Orient. It's a real history lesson in every show. Making headlines of late, is Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. Of course you remember Bob Roop, from scientific legend to, shall we say, demonic rule breaker under the auspices of Kevin Sullivan. He talks about it all on that great podcast. There's the Captain's Corner, GrappleCon, TR Shocks the World, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast, the WrestleCopia News Network, the Power Hour, and given the way things are going, a lot more to come. Take time to check out the podcast from WrestleCopia. Well, how do I find them, you may ask? Real simple, WrestleCopia.com. And you can find us there too, most of our recent episodes. It's worth your time. Come on, ring the bell with us and jump in the ring. Okay, guys, we're starting out with a very bad businessman because he let me on his network. It's Ray Russell of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How you doing?
What's going on, Bob?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate being part of the crew there. It's been fruitful for me, I'll tell you that right off the bat. So thank you for your contributions too. It's been really a lot of fun so far.
Oh, we're happy to have you. Anybody that puts out a quality podcast, they're welcome to, test my waters and, we can see if it works for the WrestleCopia network and we can see if we can add another, partner to the list. But I was absolutely infatuated with your podcast from the beginning, knowing your background and knowing your history inside the wrestling business from a different standpoint than running a company or working in a company, but rather the magazine business. And it's been a good time listening to your shows, and it just seemed like common sense, I guess. We had you on one of our podcasts. It was going to be a regional wrestling episode, and I said, this is too good. And we moved it over to the granddaddy of them all, the Wrestling Memory Grenade show, and had a lot of great feedback having you on there.
Well, thanks for everything. I will say that naturally, because I'm curious, I've been dabbling in a lot of your shows on the you know what? The Puro show is, I find to be, there's nothing else like it anywhere in the podcast world. That one is really unique. Do you agree with me on that?
Oh, yeah. And I told Dan Ginnity, who is basically the host of the show, I try to narrate and navigate and kind of get him through, but Dan's the one with all of the research, all the information, and I do my part, but Dan has so much from 35 years of studying the history of the world of Japanese professional wrestling and tape trading, collecting. He's been collecting the videos for nearly 35 years. He probably has everything that exists and then some. And so I don't know that you can find it anywhere else, especially in the English language anyway.
Okay, let's talk about when Ray and I decided to do the show. We're going to talk about whatever pops in our head. And this just popped into my head. I've been meaning to ask any other podcaster this question. I know I wouldn't ask the Arcadian Vanguard people stuff like this, but I'm going to ask you this. Did you start with your own podcast? Obviously, you started with one, which was probably yours, right?
Yeah. So basically, I was invited to a retro website that did like 70s, 80s, 90s retro stuff. Not necessarily wrestling, just anything retro. And I knew the guy from Wrestling Message Boards that was inviting me to join his podcasting world. And I said, what if we did a wrestling one? And he said, well, we already got one of those, but let me go talk to the co-owner and get back to you. And he said, all right, you got the green light, go for it. And so we did about 8 or 9 episodes on there of the Grenade Show. And I said, this just isn't really getting out there on here. This is a wrestling show. This is more of a retro website. There's a little niche of wrestling fans on here, but not a whole lot. And so we ventured off into WrestleCopia.com, and it started with the Grenade Show. But yeah, it was initially started with the Wrestling Memory Grenade was our first show, which covered the 1989 NWA project to begin things. Did like 30 plus episodes, just breaking down the entire year of 1989 in the NWA.
But since you named it WrestleCopia, which is like a play on cornucopia, which means a lot of different things,
right?
Obviously, you had a vision of expanding it rather quickly, right?
Yeah, if you even go back to the very first episode of The Grenade, I say right out of the gate, part of the WrestleCopia brand. So it was already in the back of my mind. We had some shows we started recording immediately, like Monday Warfare, where we started breaking down the Monday Night War week to week. I initially wanted to incorporate a territory podcast. It took a little bit of time to get it up and running, but then came regional wrestling. I wanted to do a Memphis show, and there just wasn't time in the week at that point in time. So I morphed the Memphis show into part of regional wrestling. So we have part of that we do a Memphis project there. And as you said, I just wanted to grow. I wanted to cover as much as we possibly could throughout the annals, the history of wrestling.
And you're taking on podcasts that have been around before you got involved, like Dave Dynasty was around on his own, I believe, before he hooked up with you, right?
Mhm.
And now I've joined the bunch too. I have to admit that Dave joining was a big determinant factor in me coming on board, because it was like, yeah, this is good. These are similar things. These are people with a similar mindset about wrestling history, or basically a way of looking at it. And now you seem to be getting a real cohesive. There's some newer stuff. There's some comedy. There's a little bit of wacky stuff. There's this old school straight history. So there's a little something for everybody. Like you say, it's a cornucopia. Yeah, a cornucopia. I can't
Yeah,
talk.
I think my original commercial said the name WrestleCopia derives from wrestle for wrestling and copia, which is defined as having plenty or a abundance of. And so that was the idea, the copious amounts of wrestling history, basically.
What does that mean? Does that mean cornucopia means a shit ton of corn? I guess is that what it means?
Could be, could be.
Yeah,
I never looked up the cornea part.
Well, I just knew that I thought it was a thing that was stuffed with goodies, like
Yeah, sure.
that round thing. It's supposed to be
Yeah,
stuffed
it's
with
got
all
some
kinds of
grapes and shit falling out of
candy.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm an old man. I should have learned this stuff, But no, it's a situation for me where I think that this has been really fruitful, like 6 weeks in or whatever it's been. So I have to say thanks, because I work. You tell me. I work so hard on this thing. I believe in old school. Anything that says AI on it and all the electronics, I ignore it. I still listen back to every single interview I do, edit it very, painstakingly. I would say if you and I talk for an hour, 45 minutes, it will take me about 3 hours to go through it. Then I tend to do something a little creative, a little comedy opening or something like that. I literally buy the music that's on the podcast, or get rights to it. You have to pay for that. And then stitch it all together. And that's why Stitcher was such a great name for a podcast app, wasn't it? So naturally they go out of business.
Right.
And speaking of podcast, here's a good question. I don't think there is any such thing as the podcast business. And I'll tell you why. We just found out that Chartable is gone. They're sunsetting. In other words, Spotify bought it and they're just putting it to bed, right? So there will really be no cohesive place to get a ratings chart anymore that I can find, unless somebody knows something. Also, we have seen Stitcher go out. We have seen other podcast apps flop. Is there really a podcast industry? I mean,
Well,
because it's like grabbing
listening.
It's like, yeah, but it's like grabbing for smoke. There's no cohesion to it. There's no centralized way for even fans to get. Somebody should put out a website about podcasts without being a podcast, just all kinds of stuff, because it's getting harder and harder, because more podcasts come out all the time, from what you and I do to the old lady that makes, pots for her flowers and stuff like that. And it all has its spot. But what I'm saying is, from the time I started, well, at this point, it's 3 years ago till now, everything has changed completely. And I don't understand why, if podcasting is so popular, that the companies we've kind of leaned on are just going by the wayside one by one. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know their structure, their infrastructure in regards to business, or how any of that works, because there's so many mom and pops, if you will, popping up and trying to do their thing. And really, I just try to share it everywhere I can. And if you build it, they will come, as long as it's quality anyway. I've seen some people out there complaining, wait a minute, I'm putting a podcast out every week. I've been doing it for years now, but I'm not getting any listeners. And sometimes you have to look at yourself in the mirror, or take some advice and see that why that might be. Because again, the grenade, it wasn't like we put a show out there one week and people said, oh, this guy I've never heard of has a podcast, I have to listen to it. We waited weeks, then we waited months, and eventually it popped. This guy told that guy told this girl over here, and she told her friends, and so on and so forth. And it just grew from there, I think. There was a lot of sharing, and people underestimate how much retweeting and sharing really goes in the social media department when you're not an Arcadian Vanguard, or you're not part of Conrad's crew, in regards to helping us out and growing our shows. Because I have people to this day go, I didn't know Bob Roop had a podcast, but now that I know, man, I'm listening to it every week. It's great. I love hearing the old time storytelling. Or I didn't know this, or I didn't know Tommy Rich joined Doug Gilbert. I didn't know these guys had a podcast. I didn't know there was a podcast about territory stuff. You guys work so hard, and it's great. at the end of the day, because I don't care if you just now joined. We've been doing, say, regional wrestling for a couple of years now. As long as you find it and you stay here after you find it, that's what I care about.
Right, right. But one thing I do like is your website too, because and by the way, it's WrestleCopia.com. Could it be any easier? And everything's is just right there. Everything's cohesive, and all the different flavors are right there. And it's a really good website. I really like it.
Appreciate it.
No,
Yeah,
you know,
we do our
because
best to advertise everyone on there and just get all the shows out there.
yeah, just a one-stop shopping. As it
Well,
were.
you know, there's a lot of people out there that are technologically impaired. They refuse to grow with the times. They don't want to use podcast streaming apps, which is fine. That's why we make the shows available to listen to on WrestleCopia.com itself. I don't necessarily want people to be listening to it there, but I want to leave that there in case that's how they do listen. However, at the same time, I wanted to put everything there, one lump sum of shows where you guys can kind of scroll through and see everything that's dropping week to week.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I did the same thing with my own website too. I mean, it's like just I discovered that my listenership will be older because I'm old, and other old time fans are probably going to listen. Although to find out that like 35-year-old Kayla Sparks will listen, that knocked me out. I had no idea. But the thing is, they don't want to go looking for podcast apps. They just, where do I go? So now I'm reduced to telling people just type in Outdated Wrestling Hour on a browser.
That's it.
Because it's just as good. You know, you don't have to tell anyone. Because they won't, what? Stitcher? What do you, what? Tune in? What the who? You know, just, they want it simple. And I admit, you know, I'm going to skew a little bit older, so keep it simple. That's it. I mean,
whatever pops up and you can click play on, it works, right?
Yes, exactly. If I could put the thing in the mail, I would do that. You know, that's like, I got to get to the post office. You know, I'm sorry, I do every old man shtick in the world. How do you do it? Do you sleep?
A lot less than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on about 5 hours a day work days right now, and it's. I'm not bragging. I hate it. You know, 20-something-year-old me I would have like, oh, I could do that all week. But 40-something-year-old me really appreciates his sleep. And so luckily, Friday nights into Saturday mornings, Saturday nights into Sunday mornings, sometimes I get a little of it back. But through the week, man, it's maybe 5 hours a night because I got to be up. I got all these kids to get to school and all this stuff. So, yeah, it's work from wake till nightfall. Well, actually beyond nightfall, till bedtime.
And this is how I know I'm old, too. You know, we go back 30 years. I was a musician, and I was out at least 3 nights a week locally doing jam nights, and then I would tour on top of that, and it never fazed me. I was drinking everything smooth, no problems. I had enough energy. Now, if I do an extra 15 minutes during this interview, I'm going to crawl up like a shrimp on the ground and just go to sleep. So it's like it's different. I'm getting not weary. I'm getting tired. The second podcast, this is why I only do the second podcast every 2 weeks, because it's like, if I did 2 in 1 week, I think I have no time to breathe at that point. You know, especially the way I edit, I need the time to put it together correctly.
I think, anybody who has that motto of no days off is a pretty wise man, because I'm sure you've experienced this in your lifetime somewhere, Bob. When you take too much time off, it gets really hard to get back into the groove of things. And I find myself when I take too much off, which it doesn't really happen that often, but when I do, I go, I don't really feel like doing this now. And I try to put it off, but I know that I can't. And so it's just a constant motion with me. Anytime I have 10 minutes, I go, okay, what can I do that takes 10 minutes to do? And that's what I'm going to do. Edit 10 more minutes of a show, do a little more research on something, watch 10 more minutes of something to take notes on. It's always something. It's a constant go anytime I have that open opportunity.
Well, you're a little more regimented than I am, because I'll have a guest, and then sometimes we'll do something stupid, and then we won't have a guest. You know, it just goes with the flow. I go with the flow with who I can get when I can get them. The problem is it's situations like I'm doing right now. I'm interviewing you today. I got another interview Thursday. I had an interview yesterday. I was on somebody's radio show on Saturday, and I had interviews on Thursday and Monday of last week. So if you can see a pattern here, it's like, this is my leisure time. You know, I can't really have a whole lot of time to do anything else. So it's like, Yeah, it's worth it. If you're having fun, I honestly think the key to podcasting is do it for yourself. Put out something that you think that entertains you. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. Put out something that's original that you think is good. If you think it's good, other people are going to latch on to that vibe. I'm convinced. And all the best podcasts are like that. If you can put out something that's unique, which is hard to do, and entertaining, which is even harder to do, I think you've struck gold. And you've got a lot of shows like that.
Yeah, I'm my own worst critic. So even though I'm on a ton of different shows, people probably think I like to hear myself talk. That's not the case. But at the same time, I go back and I listen to everything. Like you said, I edit. I'm my own editor. I'm my own producer. I'm my own researcher. I do all of that for the shows that I'm on, period. I don't have the help that some other people get, whether it's free or they pay for it. I don't know. But I don't have that luxury. And so I kind of do everything here in-house, if you will, for the most part. Now, Bob, I know you do your show. Dave handles his own editing and whatnot. But in general, any show I'm on, it's technically mine to, edit and do all that stuff with. So I hear everything I say. And that's, at the beginning, too many ums and uhs in the first couple episodes of the Grenade Show. And boom, it was eliminated by week 3. And so that's being my own worst critic. That's how I was able to kind of develop into just natural flow and just keep going.
I have such a good editing software that I don't tell people what it is. Because it's so good and it's so unknown that I'm like, this is my little secret. I found this and a big pile of editing softwares. I'm going to stick with it. Oh, it's so good. I'm trying to get the ums and ahs out. It is so smooth. Oh, this is too inside baseball for our listeners. Anyway, let's talk wrestling. I think we should talk about wrestling.
Sounds good to me.
I really like the way WWE looks these days in terms of the visual presentation of the regular shows. It looks more sports-like than it has in a long time. The bit where they'll follow someone through the back of the arena, through the gorilla position out into the hall and then into the arena, with the camera trailing them. Real sports has done that forever. The same with the people coming out of their cars and with their civvies on, walking toward the arena. It makes it looks kind of real, and anything that looks realistic, I'm all for.
Oh, absolutely. And I got to go back though to maybe say the Attitude Era when they were doing that initially, watching the guys walking into the buildings and whatnot. So did sports steal that from wrestling and then wrestling take it back from sports is what I'm wondering there.
Well, I know, who got stuff stolen. The first sport I ever saw was that had a rotating camera around a field was Vince McMahon's XFL.
Yeah.
You remember how that camera used to rotate? Yeah. Now that is everybody does it. Even Major League Baseball does it now. They didn't do it before he did it. He was the first one to do it.
No, I don't know that Vince came up with the idea, but whoever he had in production certainly
did. Yeah.
A trophy for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. I honestly, because I remember thinking how novel it looked and how close he got into huddles and stuff like that. I'm like, that really looks sharp. Now every sport does it. Even during the World Series, they were using it like the camera on a string. If you're sitting in the third deck of a stadium, you can see the thing whizzing around, and it's like, oh, that's really cool. I still think it's cool. I think it's a real innovation in sports broadcasting. So, but anyway, they look so slick. But what do we think of the content?
I don't really watch it that much, Bob, to be honest with
really?
you. SummerSlam was in my neck of the woods, so I took the kids to that. My brother came up from Cincinnati. He came with us too, because the last time I went to a SummerSlam, they were also in Cleveland way back in 1996. My brother didn't get to go, so we did this one together, and I took my kids, and everybody had a great time. I thought they did a really good job. I saw some complaining online, like it was too predictable. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that the show made sense? Because I'm cool with that. And I was fine with it. I was fine with it. I thought the production was great. I thought everything about it was, a good time. I wish we gotten into the building a little smoother and home a little smoother, but that was more about the city than the wrestling company. But what I do see from, I think everything makes sense. I read this and that. I don't read everything about what's going on anymore, but I try to keep up so I know what's going on PLE to PLE.
Right.
And people say, what is a pay-per-view?
Right. Yeah. Well, they may be coming back. They might be coming back. Well, I get the vibe they're coming back for WWE. I do. I think that I read one of the executives say, well, our PLEs are undervalued. You know what that means?
Well, yeah, that means the price hike at the very least.
Or a different platform that they have to pay for. I can see that happening again. I really could.
Well, they have a little too many. I don't know to keep the people coming back so often.
Well,
That's a lot of pay-per-views.
I think they'd be cutting off their nose to spite their face, because right now, like the last year and a half, 2 years, they're just printing money. Everything works. Why
Yes.
mess with a good formula?
You got that right. Well, they're always wanting to make more, though, right? Not just WWE. I mean, any business, right?
Well, now it's a cooperative business too. Maybe the TKO or whatever has their own ideas on how to handle that. But well, this is gonna be an interesting 2025, starting with the Netflix thing. Ooh, I can't even fathom WWE being on Netflix. But I don't know why, because people watch Netflix like it's NBC now. It's another station.
Mm-hmm. Well, those last few years, Vince was in control and nothing made sense, and it just got to the point where nobody was over to whatever degree. I started losing interest to the point where even when Royal Rumble season gets here, that's when everybody gets in the groove. The Royal Rumble is a great event, takes you all the way into WrestleMania. You're hooked, you're following all of that. And I got to the point where even the Royal Rumble, I'm like, yeah, okay, there's like one guy in it that can win it. And that's when it becomes, what's the point? And so I love the fact that they've been able to turn everything around, storyline wise, booking wise, building the stars up wise, to where you go, man, there's like 8 people that could technically win this. And now the way they tell stories, there's the mid-carders could technically win it and go on to WrestleMania, especially with it being 2 nights. So it's anybody's game again. And there's a lot more, not just over stars with the fans, but with me, which is a different thing because I'm totally out of the loop and I can't really suspend my disbelief like I used to be able to. So even though knowing it's a work, I used to be able to still get into it and enjoy it. And I don't know that I can do that on the same level anymore, but I think they've done a great job where they are right now, to where I'm looking forward to seeing what they do this coming year.
Yeah, me too. And, I'm a fan of some individual. I mean, Gunther, give me him 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. I think he's great. I like Rhea Ripley, although she can't stay healthy lately, but, but what a talent. I'm a big fan of Dominic Mysterio. When you first see a really good tool, like early Miz was a tool and, Kurt Angle was a tool, the guys with the really grating personality, Honky Tonk Man, if you go back years, you hated them because they were tools. They were just jerks, but they did it so well. You don't appreciate it until a passage of time goes by and you realize, holy smokes, they were good at what they did. If you can annoy people, you can make money in wrestling. It's the only thing like it, like the Grayson Waller and other people like that. It's like, oh God, what a tool. Get this guy off. But that's what he's trying to do. Only wrestling does that.
And he's a good talker too, that Grayson Waller. I know one of my sons sitting over here across from me right now. He's a fan of his and Austin Theory. I don't know that I get everything that goes on today, but I can see where the interest is in characters like that, because sometimes you like the guys as you referred to as the tool in the storyline right now. And those, you need those, right? I mean, you could even look at Roddy Piper on a completely different degree now. I'm not comparing the current stars to Roddy on the promos and whatnot, but Roddy was a different cat, when he got a hold of that microphone as well. He was there to stir the pot.
People go nuts for LA Knight, and he's kind of a jerk too. I mean, he may be over, but he's not a nice guy. I mean, he's not particularly complimentary to anybody, and he's braggadocio. So, who he is? He's Buddy Rogers. That's who he is.
Oh, wow. That's a hell of a comparison, man.
No, well, not so much in the ring. You could not compare the two in the ring because it's two different eras. But in terms of, Buddy Rogers was hated just for being full of himself.
Yeah.
Right? That's all it took back then. Some of my favorite things to look back on are people who got over for the smallest little things, like Buddy Rogers just for being strutting into the ring and being full of himself. The Love Brothers tag team in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
They would come out.
My dad used to tell me about them.
They would come out, give a peace sign, and then put a peace symbol with the ropes, and the fans wanted to kill them. Those damn dirty hippies, right? I mean,
my dad would tell me stories of Hartford and Reginald Love, and how when the baby face made the comeback, they would get down on their knees and throw out the peace sign, peace, brother, peace. And I would pop. I never got to see them, until watching videotapes and things, but I would pop for the stories, because how awesome is that? That's chicken shit heel, but it's great stuff.
I'm telling you, that was. Again, it was subtle. Heels are very, very rare. And when you can get, the people to boo their lungs out just because of your attitude, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
It's not like Papa Shango where he had to practically set people on fire, over the top. They didn't
Literally.
need to be over the top. They got over just by being freaking annoying, right?
Yeah.
But
Right.
I love that stuff. The subtleties of it all. It's just there's one thing wrestling is not. Nothing's subtle anymore.
No, that's
I can't imagine going to a card and watching a 20-minute draw like they always used to have when I used to go to cards. It seemed like every WWF event I ever went to had a 20-minute draw in the first match. You couldn't do that now. Do you agree with that?
No, I totally, especially in the opener. I think at the very least, if you were going to try to pull that off, it would have to be two guys the fans are heavily invested in at this point. Even then, they would be confused because you would have to train them what a draw is. I'm not saying they don't know what a draw is. I mean, there's draws in other sports and things of that nature, but in pro wrestling, we're trained not really to see too many draws and to, like you said, back in the day, that was a Vince Senior Classic to kick off the show with a 10, 15, 20-minute draw with the preliminary guys, usually.
I made a prediction on one earlier. I don't know if I said this on and off for podcast, but I'm going to say it again here. I have a prediction for 2025. Gunther is going to do a 60-minute Broadway with somebody. 60 minutes. They're going to bring back the 1 hour. I am telling you, I feel it in my bones. I think if anybody can do it, he could do it, because he's a real athlete and he can pace himself. I honestly think it was such an old school idea. I bet they could pull it off. Any thought on that one?
Well, I think they could easily, with a guy with the stamina of a Gunther, they could do an Iron Man type match where it would go 60 minutes. I don't know that they would work the draw in because I don't know if the crowd would be happy with that finish, sitting there for an hour and not giving us a finish. But I'm not saying they couldn't do it. And, they'd have to be really crafty and really wise in how they would pull that off. I would certainly not. I don't know that I would pull that on a pay-per-view, but with the rumors of Raw and SmackDown both going to 3 hours in January, that's something you could easily work into.
I still think an hour Broadway is so uncreative that it would be creative because nobody would see it coming. Nobody would see that coming.
But I don't know how much power he really has in the decision-making overall. Not the booking, but the decision-making, because we've got belts coming up left and right. Now there's going to be a U.S. women's title belt. I don't know that we need another title belt. There's crown jewel titles now. And
yeah, but they're kind of like an honorarium. I don't think they're going to defend them. They will have that title in theory until next year when they go back and then defend it there. I don't have a problem with that if it's like a yearly thing and the belt is just incidental to the accomplishment. That's a whole different ball of wax. But let's look at AEW. They have the Sugar Plum Bumpkin Championship. I don't even know what half of these championships mean. The Sandpaper Championship, the Banana Split Championship. I there's so many champions, and it's even worse. And the people on Facebook are right. Every independent wrestler has a belt. Every independent wrestler has a belt. They always pose with a belt. What belt? Where did you win this? Where the ring you put up behind a 7-Eleven? Where did you get this championship from? I think it's overkill. I think championships should be special and sparse. What do you think?
There was a point where Vince wanted to unify all these belts way back when. You get rid of the Intercontinental title belt, and that was too much for me. I think we need a upper mid card type belt. We need to be able to get over the talent to get him to that next time, the world title eventually, right? So that was great for Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, those guys, and things of that nature throughout the years. So I'm down for having multiple titles, but I don't think we need as many as we have now. And you're right. They're everywhere. Everybody, I got a title. You got a title. Everybody gets a title. And to the point where, what does a title mean? And we've heard that in the past. And that just, Triple H is so old school in so many ways, the way he's trying to make the matches longer and make the storylines sometimes a little too long, honestly, to where I even lose interest, but to just go back to old school to a degree. So that's why I wonder how much decision making he has when it comes to creating belts and things, because we just have so many right now. I can't keep track, and I don't watch it like I used to, just on the daily, on the weekly, the current product. I don't know that I would be able to keep track even if I was.
But this even goes back to the 80s. I mean, the NWA had the Western States Heritage Championship. What?
You wheel.
What? If Larry Sabisco had it, Barry Windham had it, and that's all I remember. But
there wasn't one too many other holders.
And those are the type of belts that they would have and not have. Like, they'd show up on TV without a belt in a tag team match, and then they would show up oh, he's defending the Western States Heritage Champion. And, what? It got confusing. It was just too much. Oh, man. But it's like, well, AEW is even worse. I mean, they not only do they have their own titles, they have the other groups are affiliated with titles, and they're all fight for a title. There's 7 title matches on a card sometimes. And it's like, when you have that many titles, none of them mean anything.
Yeah, I can't speak too much on AEW. I follow a little of it. I know most of the top guys, but I don't really know a whole lot going on there because I'm not into the current product, the no selling. And here we go with the old guys telling us about how the wrestling's supposed to be. I mean, I can't, like I said, it's hard for me to suspend my disbelief with a good product right now, much less something where guys aren't selling anything. Mm-hmm. Right. And yes, the pile driver on WWE the other day between Orton and Owens was a huge deal for WWE because Vince literally outlawed it decades ago, like 20 years ago or whatever. Outside of Kane and The Undertaker doing the tombstone, nobody was permitted to do any type of move where you drop somebody directly on their head. It was just a conscientious effort not to get sued, I would have to think.
There's another thing you just brought up inadvertently that we talked about recently, continuity. WWE, the last 6 months or so, has had such good continuity. Something like that. Something that there's a rationale for. They've been really good at remembering things. Whereas old WWE never remembered anything. They would go in a certain direction or start a feud, and then they would just forget it. Then next week they're wrestling different people on TV. Mm-hmm. The one thing that bothers me is that conversely with AEW, they'll bring in a new star or someone new they just signed. And the next week they're in a tag team match against somebody they never met before. Why? Who? There's no build with anybody there. I think they assume that everybody knows every wrestler that watches their show. I put it to you, young man, that I don't think they do.
No, and I think that's one of their major problems is they just assume anybody watching knows everything as these people are coming in. The WWE for decades treated everyone as a brand new talent, even if they had been a big star over in WCW, outside of maybe like a Ric Flair where you go, oh, do you know who that is? Outside of that, everybody's recreated, reinvented. This is the big leagues now. This is the way they wanted to sell it, but they also wanted to assume you only watch the WWF. So we're going to tell you who this guy is from our vantage point. And so AEW does not do that. They go, this is Joe Blow. And it's like, well, who the hell's Joe Blow? Oh, he's a huge guy on the indies. Okay, but I don't watch the indies. So educate me because this is on actual TV. It's on cable TV. Tell me who this guy is from your vantage point, right? And so they don't really do that. And another thing they have a hard time doing is keeping guys on TV. You introduce them, and then 2 weeks later, we don't see them for 6 weeks.
Right.
And, I think a lot of that goes back to Tony Khan, who has every right as a billionaire owner of the company to be the booker. He can do whatever he wants. But, a lot of people say Tony just needs to give that book to somebody that knows what they're doing. But the inmates have ran that asylum from the beginning. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how well that's going to work.
But, everybody, I think you and I are talking from a position where get a booker who knows how to book and has experience. You tell me who that is now. Seriously. Jerry Jarrett is gone. I mean, the Crockett's are gone. Dusty's gone. Kevin Sullivan is gone. They're all gone. Who's a booker anymore? I don't even know. Well, I mean, other than you would say Triple H is a booker. And the WWE has writers, so I don't know who they are, right? So
I would hope they have a lot less writers now without Vince in charge, though. I hope it's more Triple H with some help versus
I don't know. I'm
40 people around a table.
I'm on LinkedIn, and they're looking for writers all the time, but they're looking for TV writers, though.
Okay.
See, they never would hire somebody who was in the wrestling business. Like Craig Peters was on a show last year, and he said, why didn't they ever look to us for creative? We were creating things in the magazine. Nobody even thought of looking into, I guess the only person who ever really did that and got a job doing it was Vince Russo because he was doing WWE magazine. Right. And, the famous story, Vince slaps the magazine on the table and goes, this is what I want on my show. And that started the whole doggone thing. So it's like, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, who are today's bookers? Beats me.
Yeah, I don't know whoever's in whoever's ear. I mean, really in AEW, I would have to imagine it's really whoever's in Tony Khan's ear booking their angles or their friends' angles. And then obviously, like you said, Triple H has probably given some bullet points to these other writers and away they go over in WWE. But are there really other established American promotions that need a quality booker to, to draw the money. If they're making money right now, they're probably going to do it either way. I'm not sure who's in charge of TNA right now in regards to writing, but their business is up. I've been looking at their arenas, the shots online anyway. They look like they're, I don't know about sellouts, but they're doing pretty damn well, it looks like, in the recent months.
Yes, absolutely. And then there's the disappointment since the year 2000 of the NWA. Get ready to play taps. I mean, I don't even understand. They're not even on the CW app anymore.
Oh, really?
When they started NXT on the CW network, they took the NWA completely, even off the app, so they're gone from there. And now they're running their weekly power show on some. I don't know where they're running. I know they're running it, but on some. I don't know. Just it's not even on YouTube. It's like I don't understand their business model. I don't know how they're moving forward. I don't know how they even afford to do the little spot shows they do. I really don't. They did pretty good in Philadelphia about 2 months ago. But, everything runs in the 2300 arena. You can sell out Joe Blow's wrestling league in there. It's just a great wrestling arena there. But the concepts they're coming up with. Baron von Storm. Did you hear about this?
I have no idea.
Tim Storm, you know who that is.
Tim
Storm was in the NWA. He was former NWA champion when they were in Indy, when Corgan first took over.
Okay.
They gave him a claw hold and calling him Baron von Storm, which is like half Baron von Raschke. But it's too much like Von Raschke. What's the Von?
Well, I was going to make a joke and say we all have to evolve or devolve.
Yes.
In the case of that gimmick, but yeah.
To me, that was my official end of watching NWA. I rooted. I hoped. I thought maybe they could bounce it back. Yes, they lost a lot of talent due to the pandemic. I think that's what killed them. And, now it's like anybody with a pair of tights. Seriously, that's what it looks like. Ricky Morton's son. Come on. I just, there's nothing there. I mean, EC3 is all right, but, I just, there's nothing that would make me run to the TV with a bowl of popcorn, we'll put it that way. So I don't know what to say. Are you discovering, you do a lot of nostalgia podcasts. Are you discovering anything out there that you are shocked still exists or that people remember, or like the Hackenschmidt tape that just showed up out of nowhere?
Right.
Has the entire talk of the wrestling world going. Have you seen that?
There were so many holy grails back in the day in the tape trading world, and I was very much involved in tape trading back in the 90s, the beginning of the 2000s. I even started converting all my tapes to DVD back around 2002 or so, and then on to streaming digital, so I can continue to watch things. But it's amazing how much stuff pops up now compared to before, because there's so much new technology to clean things up or to make things better and to convert things. And you're seeing these weird random things pop up, and it's great week to week. I go, there's an episode of Southeast or Gulf Coast Wrestling, or just some random episodes that are found on, random TV studios and things of that nature. So you never know what's going to happen or what's going to come about. But doing the regional wrestling show has been great. Not so much Twitter. Twitter's a different breed than Facebook. I don't know if you've noticed that, Bob, but two different types of human beings live on those two different worlds. And I'm on both because I run a podcast network. And so I kind of have to be if I want to get everything out there.
That's me too. I have something like 12,000 followers on Twitter just from osmosis long before I started doing the podcast. Mm-hmm. And I just don't want to hang there. I'll put a placard up, but that's about it. Yeah. I don't like the forum anymore, and I won't say why, but I just don't like it anymore. It's not what it was. It's not Twitter. It's X. Yeah, and that's fine. It just changed. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's changed quite a bit. And there's I don't know it off the top of my head, but there's a new Twitter out there. A lot of people are jumping over to that. I'm sure if you Googled it, you could figure it out. I don't remember what it's called.
Is it Blue Sky? I think something called Blue Sky.
There you go.
It is. It's so much like Twitter. It's scary. Other than I think it has a kind of a lighter tone to it. Mm-hmm. Fine, I join. Who cares? Another place to put a placard up. Ching ching.
But the tens of thousands of retro fans maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know, of retro wrestling fans that are on Facebook is absolutely insane.
It is.
I mean, to have all the followers I have there, all the replies, all the interests, the shares of all the old school videos I post, not just of the WWF, the Hulkamania era stuff, but there's so many people that have so many fond memories of no matter what you post. If I post a random result from Akron from 1976, I got people messaging me, can you post more results from Akron in the 70s, Ray? I'm like, if I find them. or it doesn't matter. Georgia 81, so many fans. I remember watching this every Saturday, 6:05. What great memories. I remember watching this episode. I remember my mom being in the room when this happened. Just so many people sharing so many great memories from throughout history, throughout time, watching all this stuff, and thousands out there.
Yeah, it's crazy. And another thing I love about Facebook are the guys and women, I guess, in some cases. Where do they even find these newspaper clips of old ads and old card results? Fascinating stuff. I can't get enough of that stuff. I know it's meaningless to look at a card, like you say, from Akron in 1974, where the main event was Bulldog Vargas or Ernie Ladd or something like that. But you know what? I remember that era. I was part of that scene, and I love it. I love anything that's just show me something from the old days that's like pre-'80s, and I'm there. Because I hate to say this, I started watching wrestling in 1970. Like I was old enough. I was 12 then, so I have the memory bank of starting to understand it at that point. So anytime somebody whips out something from like between 71 and 78, I'm like, wow, this is my jam, So I'm really thankful. And these guys are doing it for nothing. They're just doing it because they enjoy it.
Yeah. Passion projects, man.
Yeah. There's no profit motive in it. They just do it because they love it. I think that's almost wholesome in a way. Hey, you guys remember this? It's cool. That's great.
Yeah, the only ads we have on our podcasts are our own. So I'm not making any money off of any advertising that we do on our shows. So anything I'm doing is certainly a passion project right now. We're trying to make it more, but it's a slow go. But we're building it, right, Bob? We've got so many great shows here at WrestleCopia, and that's why I created the Patreon. The Patreon, basically, the idea initially was to just pay the bills, help me keep this thing afloat. And for a couple of years, it wasn't buying me a hamburger, Patreon. So I put a lot of work and effort and time and added everything I could think of, my show notes and this, that, and the other, the early access to a lot of the shows. And it's slowly built, and some people do it because they want the early access to those shows. They go and they listen the minute they drop, or they like reading. I had a couple of people tell me, I just love reading the show notes, because I remember I used to go back and I used to scroll the old boards and read their thoughts watching, old pay-per-views and old videos and things like that. And so they kind of use my show notes as their way of reading what I said, about certain things. And it was the video cast that really popped a lot of recent listeners and viewers and whatnot too. So it's really important to have something like that, though, to just pay the bills, all these software and the hosting. I don't have to tell you about that kind of stuff, but to pay all that stuff, because, that's what's keeping WrestleCopia alive, is just literally the listeners.
Right. And how thankful are you for them? I mean, again, part of my charm life is people remember the crap I did 35, 40 years ago. I don't mean to say the word crap, but somebody will PDF me a page of something. Remember when you wrote this? And I'll go, no. But then I read it and it comes back. You remember where you were, who you wrote about, who was sitting behind you at the time. It's really cool. I'm very lucky in that I was able to start a wrestling podcast with sort of a name, sort of a authority voice, because I had been with the magazines. Not everybody who starts a wrestling podcast is so lucky, and I can't, that's why I'm so full of gratitude to all the old fans out there, because they all remember. I get emails where people say, I used to ride the school bus and read your column. I'm like, oh my gosh. To know what you've done has a little bit of value to somebody, it's all been worth it. That makes it worth it. I don't mean to be corny, but I really feel that way. It's like I wasn't fooling myself. People really read this stuff. You don't even, when you work for a magazine company, you don't think about somebody sitting down with the work you did and reading it. You don't have time. You got to go from this to the next thing and write another story and do some editing and layouts. And I used to do photography and everything else. You don't think about the product being out in the world. You just don't. You don't have time to do it.
Sure.
Now, all these years later, people show me their stack of PWIs. I'm like, cool. I wish I had that. That's my one regret. I took 6 magazines with me out of the office, and that was it.
Wow.
Out of the thousands I worked on, I took 6.
Yeah, I got a couple bins worth it. They're my originals. I bought a few over time. I probably got a few on eBay way back before they became a collector's item, right? Before they're really expensive now, but back then people were just getting rid of them to get rid of them. And I bought a few that way. I bought a few at flea markets way back in the 90s, talking way back, like 50s and 60s magazines that I bought in the 90s at flea markets and whatnot. But I still probably have a couple hundred magazines that were originally mine that I bought at the grocery stores or wherever I was at the point in time. So it's a lot of fond memories going through those.
Dude, this is a funny story. My first newspaper job was in the early 80s, right? And I'm riding home, and used to be this big, dingy bookstore. The place was literally crooked and falling into the street, but it was still in business. And I see a card table out front, and God is my witness, I swear this is true. There was probably 500 wrestling magazines on a card table in front of the store, unattended.
Wow.
And there was a little piece of paper on the mailbox that said, "Take what you want, leave $1."
Wow.
I bring home one of those Rubbermaid totes full of wrestling magazines, and my wife at the time was like, "What are you doing? You're 35 years old or whatever." I went, I'm going to read these. I hadn't gotten a job with the wrestling magazines yet, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
It was $1. How do you explain it? She was, and no woman I've ever been with is a wrestling fan. Not one of them, but that's a whole nother ball of wax. But anyway, yeah, I mean, as a full-grown adult, I saw something like that and I went, boing, I got to have these, right? I got to have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I still would if I ran into something like that. I would grab some wrestling magazines anytime. And the old ones are just some collectors. Some collector on Facebook said the 70s stuff doesn't move. I find that hard to believe, but that's what he said. The newer stuff people were hoarding. The old stuff with, let's say, Red Bastien on the cover wasn't moving. Me, I would gravitate toward the Red Bastien, but that's just me.
No, I love the 70s stuff when you can get away from all the ads, so the inflatable chicks and things in the middle.
Yeah.
And the nunchucks and all the other good stuff. There was a lot of write-ups of the outlaw stuff, just random results, people's name that I had never encountered before. And I learned a lot from just going through those areas of the magazines as well. Cause to me, it's not just about the cool pictures, the bloody chic pictures, or, what's going on in the big territories, which is cool in itself, looking at the rankings and everything like that. But it was, well, what is this? John Hunter or whatever his name is, Hunter down there in the Carolinas ran the Outlaw Show, and or this over here, the old Malden, Missouri stuff with Henry Rogers or things like that would pop up in there. That was always cool to me to kind of go back and study from, and just learning something completely different from what's out there, right?
Yeah, well, I let the cat out of the bag when I first started the podcast. I admitted on air that my favorite magazines growing up were the Kaiser books. The Wrestling Review and Ring Wrestling, because the last 10 or 12 pages were all agate results.
Uh-huh.
I love that stuff. Once in a while they'd slip a real name in too. It was in those books, of all the books, that they revealed that the executioners were Chuck O'Connor and Killer Kowalski.
Wow.
And I went, wow, this is cool. I need more of this,
I wish I could remember the names of the different sections in the magazines or which magazine it was, but one of the magazines from your era, in the first few pages, it would just it was kind of like around the horn, kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. This was going on the WWF. Yeah. This was going on. But in the middle of all of it, never failed within every few editions, they would just slip a 5-word sentence in the middle. It had nothing to do with anything else, but it would tell you who somebody was. And I used to always look for that. It's like Kato is Paul Diamond. I'm like, no shit. Okay. It's like, and I would look for that little things like that. So it was always a fun time going through the magazines. And, we talked about it when you were on my Grenade show, and you said, it was a job. I was putting this out and you knew people were reading it, but you didn't have time to think about it. But think about all the stars you guys helped build by those introducing them to the world, the pictures. I just saw somebody today online go, what the fuck was Public Enemy so big for? And my response was the magazines, man, because ECW was in Philadelphia. Maybe you got it on New York TV, but here in Ohio, I didn't get ECW until March of '96. PE was already in WCW by that point. But I believed, the hype, the build, they were in every magazine, the big pictures and and they were over in ECW. So if you got the videos, you believe the hype as well. And I'm not putting down them as a tag team. They worked in ECW, and Rocco Rock was just phenomenal talent, period. But I think the jig was up when they got to WCW. Nasty Boys didn't really want to work with them or cooperate with them, I should say.
Yeah.
And so they never really had too many great matches in WCW when they were there, but I loved Public Enemy going in because you guys had built them up for, a year, the After magazines, I mean, by that point.
I went back to see my friends at ECW when Heyman was booking, just starting to book. And Joey Styles says, come back in the booth. You used to be in the booth. I remember I was early. Now says, come on, do some color for me. I said, fine. So I'm doing color for him. And at the end of the match, for no reason at all, Public Enemy runs up into the booth and beats the living tar out of Joey Styles for real. Both of them, leaving him laying. I'm like, what's going on here? And Joey didn't know it was coming. Joey had no earthly idea. So years later, I'm talking to Todd Gordon. I'm going, why did they do that? Oh, because they liked him. That's how the wrestlers tell you that you're one of the gang. When they beat the living tar out of you, you don't know what's coming. I mean, they flipped him over and just slammed him around. I thought I was next. I hauled ass.
I remember working on a show back around 2000. There was this, what many people would call a money mark, a lady who was in the rodeo industry. She wanted to start funding some shows, some independent shows for a local promotion. And she would come to the show. She knew nothing about wrestling. She was just thought it was cool looking. And so she would sit there and watch. And then the one time she watches these two guys, they ride together everywhere. They eat together everywhere, but they were in a feud. And so they would come to the show and beat the living crap out of each other. And she would go, oh, I get it now. The more you like somebody is the more you beat the crap. I said, exactly. Yeah. Because you're friends.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's wrestling. It's like nothing else like wrestling. You can't explain it. Because you can't explain it, it's why you like it. It's like only in pro wrestling can you be 16 years old in an arena booing the heck out of a really villainous tag team. And then when you're 45, you're at a wrestling convention going, the first thing you tell the guy is, boy, I hated you. Can I have your autograph?
I can't tell you how many times Bob Roop has told me he's encountered that and he just loves it. They embrace it. That was their job, was to make you hate them. And now you appreciate it for what it was. And you come back and say, man, I hated your guts. Thank you so much for entertaining me all those years.
Bob Roop was one of the most outrageous changes in the history of Florida wrestling. I mean, he went from Bob Roop to what was his name? I don't even remember.
Maya Singh.
I think he was Maya Singh, and one side of his face was painted one color, the other another color, and he just had this leer on his face. I'm like, wow.
That's an interesting story. I don't know if we've even told it on his show yet, because we really haven't gotten to that Florida run. He may have mentioned it, but yeah, the whole idea was that Kevin Sullivan was booking and he was bringing Bob in. And when he pitched it to him, half was normal, Bob Roop, half was this Maya Singh character. And Bob was supposed to trance in and out of normal and this character. And by the time it made air, Kevin just kind of made him into this crazy character, and it just changed the entire thing. So Bob went from supposedly a semi-main event slot character to just kind of one of Kevin's lackeys. And I don't think Bob appreciated that very much, but that was the idea behind the initial Maya Singh character anyway.
Right. Boy, I used to like Mark Lewin's work as a heel during that time. I just thought he was a really good psycho. I mean, when he really went off, he was really good. He'd howl. I mean, and I remember in 63, 64, 65, he was the tag teams at Madison Square Garden as the ultimate handsome baby face. So to make that kind of a juxtaposition, he's still hanging in.
Yeah.
He's still, I think he's like 90. Yeah. And in great shape, like he's always been.
Well, I'm sure he is, but I think Lewin's craziness, his crazy gimmick, it kind of came from King Curtis over in Australia. Because I can refer back to Roop again, because when he did an Australian tour in the early 70s, he said the very first show he was on there for Jim Barnett, the main event was Lewin versus Iakea. He said they took the fight through the crowd, out the front door, and into the street, and they were whipping each other into an oncoming bus. And this was in like 1971, 72. I mean, there's no cameras following you out there to air that on TV. These guys are just doing it for shits and giggles. And so it's just amazing. And I just posted a picture the other day of Mae Young essentially taking what would be, I guess, equivalent to a power bomb onto several rows of chairs.
I just saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, was it the 1950s or the 60s? Either way, just insane for anybody to be taking that, much less in the crowd on chairs, much less females. So people think all this stuff started with ECW, or they'll reference Memphis, but there was crazy things going on long before that. We just don't have a lot of footage of it.
That photo looked real.
Oh, that
real. Photo looks real. That looks like the woman slammed her ass first into that row of chairs and she went collapsing down. Yeah. And the look on her face was like, what? It's a great photo. My God, that's great. You know, folks, you got to get on wrestling Facebook. Some of it will annoy you like crazy, but the rest of it is immensely entertaining. Wrestling on Facebook. I'm right. I mean, there's a little something for everybody there.
Yeah, there's so many great groups, you know, going back to yesteryear. Some of them take their groups too seriously. I try to stay out of those groups. It's just too much. It's like, it's wrestling and it's history. And I love all that, Bob, but you know, I'm not going to die for it. I'm not dying on a hill to say that I can't make a joke out of a funny picture or something like that. I'm not that straight-laced when it comes to pro wrestling. You know, I can still have a smile on my face when we talk about it.
You know what the bane of the internet is? The moderator, the overzealous moderator in these groups, right? It's like, would you go back and you misspelled group? Would you go back and spell it correctly? And then we'll first thing I do is quit. I see that. I'm like, I'm out. They're just throwing guys out. They're
taking the fun away.
Throw guys out. Yeah.
It's
meant for fun, you know, fun and laughs. I don't understand why anybody would take something like that seriously, but you've seen it. I mean, it's like the overzealous that should be a wrestling character. The overzealous moderator.
There you go.
That's right. He'd be like, I don't know what kind of a ring style he would have, but what the heck? So didn't
WWE do that? They had an anonymous general manager. He was kind of like.
They did. There was a question mark on a podium. I think that's right. Oh, that was awful. God. See, everybody. That was not a good period.
Well, no, it wasn't. Not at all.
I want to let you know that there's not a lot of people in any form of this business to say what they mean to me, what they say, but you're one of them. And I really appreciate getting to know you and being a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. It has already been worth it. And I want you to know that publicly. I just, it's been fun. Yeah. Fun. It's one more thing I got to do every week, but it's fun, you know.
I can kind of admit that, you know, I'm a mark at heart when it comes to certain things. And the very first time, and it was a long time ago, Bob, but the very first time that Bob Smith liked and commented and retweeted and kind of showed love and followed the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, I said, oh, maybe we're onto something here. You know, if people like Bob are into it, who has seen it and been through it all and knows a lot of the guys involved and the business and this, that, and the other. And so I just, you know, from that point forward, I was already listening to your stuff, but I just continued. I said, you know what? You know, it really helped, you know, when you hear positive influence from someone such as yourself or many of the others. Now, there are a few people that used to hang closer to WrestleCopia that joined other podcast networks. And so now they can't publicly contact us or at least put us over. So that's unfortunate, but tis the business, even if it's not much of a business.
You know, it's like we're all doing the same thing. I don't compete with anybody. That's one thing with me. After my experience in the first podcast I was on and then start my own, I do not have the mental capacity to be competitive. I just want to put out the best product I can and hope people like it, you know? And it's like, I still will go on other people's podcasts. Doesn't matter who it is, Arcadia Vanguard, it doesn't matter who it is. If something's good, I'll go, you know, I like this. This was great. I will just say something like that because I really enjoy it. I enjoy wrestling podcasts. I think it's the last vestige for old timers like me, because where else are you going to talk to people like this? Not in your real life. You're not going to bump into somebody going, I love Baron Mikel Seclune. It's not going to happen. So it's like, this is our TikTok, you know, as older folks. So I'm really thankful for all this. And like I said, the last couple of months, we're doing not just good, but great. And I can't help but think that you're part of the reason for that. So I really appreciate it.
You know, we just, I do the most plugging I can. I try to promote every show as much as I can. You certainly give us great content. You always have fun guests on week to week. So it's not too hard to say, Bob Smith, Outdated Wrestling Hour, this is what's going on this week, whether it's Kayla Sparks or anybody else you've had on recently. It's always a good time. And it's like, you go with Dave Dynasty. He's got somebody fun every week on his show. You never know who Dave's going to have. Everybody from Jerry Oates to P and frickin' News, right? So it's a fun time with him. Gene Jackson. Doing the podcast with Doug Gilbert. Doug Gilbert, great friends with Tommy Rich. So Tommy said, somebody say something about, can I join the podcast? And so Tommy gets to join in. And
that doesn't happen. That's really good. That does not happen. Right. He just walked in and said, let me do this too.
Yeah. Tommy was actually, I don't want to say more interested than Doug in his own podcast, because Doug loves doing it. But I remember Gene telling me a story where Doug was like, I think we're on like episode 7. And Tommy goes, no, brother, you're on episode 8. And that just shows you how much Tommy was interested in the show.
Wow.
Tommy's paying attention. Yeah. And Tommy wanted to be a part. He wanted to get his own thing going there. And they said, yeah, come on in, Tommy. And that'll be twice as much fun, more stories to tell that way. And so now we get like the entire Gilbert dynasty of stories, because, Doug's not just telling his stories, but he was a kid, working or watching his brother Eddie book and wrestle and do these things all over the place, but also his father, Tommy Gilbert. So Doug's got stories for decades, right? And then Tommy Rich, he had his own career. My God, former NWA world champion, the star of Georgia Championship Wrestling on the first cable, really the big cable network, TBS there. And so, yeah, Tommy's got stories for, I want to say for days, but for years as well.
I'll bet Doug doesn't remember this, but I was in a car with him, or a van, with Jerry Lawler and a few of the other wrestlers. And as we went to one of the B shows, I forget if it was West Memphis, Arkansas, or one of those smaller, or was it Mississippi even? I forget where we went. But I know I was on a very, very long car trip through the Everglades, right? To do a B show, and then I came back with them, and I bet he doesn't remember. But I was in a van with Doug. I did my Eddie Marlin impression. It was the time when Eddie was still there, and he was throwing fireballs. So Eddie got upset, and he came out. And he just goes, "Burn me, Eddie Gibbet." He wouldn't pronounce the L in Gilbert, and the whole van laughed because they knew exactly what I was talking about. Burn me, Eddie Gibbet. So I just wonder if Doug would even remember that. There's the thing. You can spend 2 days with a pro wrestler. They're not going to remember you 30 years later because they've spent 2 days with everybody. It's like they're as famous as actors and musicians are, just in a different way. I firmly believe that. TV sells things.
Some guys like a Lynn Denton, the grappler, he has great memory, an excellent memory of his career. Even like Ricky Santana, Fidel Sierra, those guys have told some great stories that we've done on the Captain's Corner podcast with Nick Massey in the past. But then like with Bob Roop, he's worked legendary matches. He feuded with all 3 Funks at the same time in Amarillo, and he remembers doing it, but he doesn't have like the basics of how the storyline played out. And we went through that though. I did a lot of digging research, and we told the story, and some of it came back to him. And some of it was like, man, I can't believe I don't remember that. And it's like, well, you did have like 8 million matches, in 40 different territories from Japan to Australia to the United States. And you can't remember all that. Especially this many decades later.
I just wonder what the wrestlers remember, because I swear this is true. I named Rob Van Dam's split-legged moonsault. When I wrote the introducing article, he did not have a name for the move. I said, I'm just going to call it a split-legged moonsault, because that's what it was. You just bounce up. Yeah. And then a year later, I hear Jim Ross saying, I'm like, holy smokes. I'm sure he don't remember that. But I know a stack of Bibles as tall as I am, I named that hold. And I'm not, I don't want any royalty from him. I'm not saying, I just wonder if he remembers that. And I guarantee he doesn't. Because, again, these guys have traveled millions and millions of miles all over the world and met a lot of people and done a lot of things. You can't expect them to remember a 20-minute phone interview I did after I came back from Memphis and to talk to him and get some facts and figures from him. So,
right.
But he was a great kid. And it was him and Sabu in Memphis, meeting them for the first time. Mm-hmm. They were probably making $50 a night. And
boy, that was, you put Sabu and Rob Van Dam in Memphis, and it just doesn't sound right.
No, and they had a third guy that Sheik trained called Judge Dredd. He's just some big, tall guy with a hat. I never saw him before or since then, but I already had seen Sabu, and Sabu came in right after that stint to Tri-State and was absolutely fantastic in a Last Blood Battle Royal they had. He was flying all over the ring. I went, oh my God, this kid is good. He was so good. And even back then, he told me he was the Sheik's nephew. I'm like, wow, I was really impressed to meet him. And yeah, they take off, and it's like, I was glad I was enough of a judge of talent to come back to the office after traveling to Memphis. I want to do a story on Rob Stakowski, because he was just so good. He did an opening match against Nightmare Danny Davis in Memphis. I said, it's the best open I've ever seen. This kid's going places. Let me do a story. So I contacted the photographer down in Memphis. He sent me a few shots, and the rest is history. But he was just, even in the magazine, he was Rob Stakowski. He wasn't Rob Van Dam yet.
Oh, so he definitely stuck out. Even when he did that short stint in WCW around 93, when he was Robbie V. Unfortunately, they didn't utilize him properly there. I'm not saying he should have been pushed way up the card. I mean, he was obviously a smaller guy and he hadn't really gotten his name out there yet, but putting him in the ring against guys like Kevin Nash, I mean, it just didn't make any sense. And that's what they were doing with him.
Yeah. It's just, well, you know what? Wrestling's a funny animal. You never know who's really going to take off. Sometimes it's a moment. Like, Steve Austin's career was struggling, and then he says, Austin 316 says, I just kicked your ass, or I just whipped your ass. And everything changed right then and there. I
was so happy for him because I had followed him since ESPN Dallas, right? So I had seen Steve Austin since the Chris Adams feud. So I was so happy, that he made it. I watched his entire WCW run, waiting for him to get that big break there that never really happened. But he was always like US title level guy, so that was fine. But when he and I wanted him to get over in WWF, and I could see it wasn't never going to get there, and then it did, and it was just great. And I was so happy for him because it was one of my favorites going back again to like 89, 90, whatever that was, when he was working with Chris Adams in Dallas. So that was a good thing, but you just real quickly, you talk about your magazines and how you guys would put all the profiles things in there and get the guys over. It worked for guys, a lot of times, like, because they went and they took the ball, not that you gave them the ball, but that was part of it. And they ran with it. So when I saw them, when they finally made it to the big times, if you will, like a Sid Vicious or Rob Van Dam, I remembered them from the magazines, and that didn't always work because you guys sold the hell out of other guys. And I thought they were going to be world beaters like a Mondo Clean. But then Damian Demento arrives, and that didn't work.
Well, they messed with him,
Well, I don't know how much it was them messing with him, and I don't know. I covered 93 WWF at length, and let's just say I wasn't too impressed with his repertoire in the ring. But
he had a look.
He did. He had the look. And that's why he worked in the magazines. The Blackhearts had an amazing look. How they didn't make it in WCW when they got that short run, beyond me, because I thought those guys were going to be amazing when they got to the big leagues. And unfortunately,
remember a tag team called the Headhunters?
Yeah, the big one.
Giant blob guys, but they could fly off the ropes.
Yeah.
I thought they were going to be big coin. I really did. I really thought so. I don't know where they went or what happened, but they never really broke out of the indies. But when I saw them, my mouth would hang open. I never saw anything like them.
No, I remember getting the
two guys that looked like Abdullah the Butcher doing sunset flips and moonsaults. Yeah.
Flips to the floor. Yeah. Rob Van Dam style things. Yeah, it was crazy. I remember I bought the IWA King of the Deathmatch tape back in 95 out of the magazines, and they were on one of the preliminary matches, like a tag match against Silver King and Texano. And they were doing these moves, and I'm like, how are these guys not in the big leagues? But, I know they had a couple very brief cup of coffees. WWF used them a couple of times, and they last about, I think, a week or two each time. I guess they just weren't ready for that level. I don't know.
I don't know much about Vince McMahon. I've ever met Vince McMahon, but I know this about him. Vince didn't really cotton to really blubbery guys. If he did, he made comedy characters out of them, like Friar Ferguson and Bastion Booger, same guy. If you had a rotund physique, you were there for laughs. He was going to make you a fool out of you. And I have a feeling he just didn't know what to do with guys like that.
Well, I think in a few instances, as long as you had the proper background, Vince would try to utilize you, like a John Tenta with the Earthquake, or Yokozuna, obviously part of the Anawai family. So he was, they gave him a shot, and he just kept getting so big to where they really couldn't do a whole lot with him.
Man, that's one of the great tragedies. He just couldn't control himself. What a shame. What a shame. Anybody who dies young like that, I really feel for them, especially if they're nice people. I don't know what to say. But enough of this maudlin stuff. Thank you for being here. We just talked about nothing for 1 hour and 8 minutes, and it felt like we talked for 18 minutes. So I'm really appreciative that you're here. These are the kind of podcasts I like. We just winged it. And
Well,
I like podcasts like this.
I appreciate that you appreciated it, Bob. If you're happy, I'm happy.
No, seriously. Listen. I listen to non-wrestling podcasts too. The best podcasts to me are the ones where you hear a conversation, you feel like you're listening in on a good conversation. And you may not even know the name of the two people that are talking, but if it's interesting, it's a good show.
Yeah, you'll stay tuned.
So nobody knows Ray Russell or Rob Smith, but they just listen to us for an hour. So,
hopefully.
Yeah, right.
I hope I didn't scare off any of your
Why would you scare? No, you're like one of the wrestling podcast stars now. I think you deserve that moniker, and because you do quality work. I enjoy it, and I'm glad to be in your number, as they used to say.
Well, we're happy to have you. Like I said, we've had so many podcasts grow over the last year here or so. Like I said, with Dave, Gene joining in, and of course yourself and the other ship. I don't want to forget those guys who cover a lot of the current goings on in the PLEs, but they also do a lot of other retro things. So shout out to those guys as well. It's because they like to talk about old school music and all kinds of fun stuff, kind of something different. If people are just getting too much wrestling, I don't know if there's such a thing, but too much wrestling, they can always click on the other ship and listen to them talk about something completely different from time to time. So we've got so much to give to the people out there, and so happy to have you part of it. And I always look forward to seeing who you're going to interview next. And I love listening to the show every week.
Well, thank you. It means a lot coming from you, folks. This is the head of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. His name is Ray Russell. Go to WrestleCopia.com, find the list of shows, click a couple of buttons, enjoy what you hear, and tell him I sent you, will you? Ray, thanks a lot.
No problem. Thank you, Bob.
Another enjoyable conversation. This is why I do these things, just to have a nice talk that people can listen in on. I really enjoy that. Ray Russell, he's one of a kind. I'm really glad to be in cahoots with that guy. Remember that the magic word is cahoots. You say it and you win $50. Remember Groucho, you bet your life? The original one, the real one, not that Jay Leno monstrosity. Yeesh. Anyway, 800-pound gorilla in the room. Current events? Nah. I have been hounded to give political views on this show. You know what? Nah. Not doing it. Not worth it. All I would do, no matter what you say, you're going to alienate somebody. At the end of the show, I say peace and love, right? I mean that. Goodwill towards all men and all women and all children and all dogs and all sloths and all cats and all mongooses. I really mean it. Life is very short. My credo, particularly as I get older, is to leave a fun imprint. I don't want to be the guy that walks away from people and go, what an egotistical jerk. I've never coveted that. What I want is just to get a smile, have a laugh. I've had mine. I've had a very charmed life. About my music career, about my wrestling magazine career, about other things I've done. I've done a million things now. Like I say, I've done a lot of stuff that mere mortals don't get an opportunity to do, and I did them all. I've been on TV, I've been on radio. I mean, come on. Schlub like me. I'm grateful for everything that's ever happened to me, including being born way back when. I could tell you more about that, but I'll tell you something slightly personal. I had a troubled birth, and something I forget about a lot, and I shouldn't forget this, is that I'm lucky to be here. We'll put it that way. Really true. I wouldn't joke about this. My parents never let me know that until I was really older. But as I got older, they informed me that I was an exceptionally premature baby and had trouble staying alive in the first day of my life. So I don't want to ever forget that. And I'm lucky to be here, like a lot of other people who've overcome things late in life, early in life, or during their birth times. Life is short. I want to enjoy whatever time I have left. Like I say, I'm so old now that there's younger faces on my coins in my pocket, but I'm here to have a good time and show gratitude toward the wrestling business, the great matches we've seen, the great people involved. And I hope we're filling that bill for you listening out here, okay? So if you want to hear, a lot of ranting and raving about this or that, this ain't the forum for me. I don't want to do that. There's plenty of other people that can do that way better than I can. So that's that. That's all there is to it. Outdated Wrestling Hour.buzzsprout.com. All our shows, I will not Patreon you. You can listen to them all right there. Oh, by the way, you can also listen to all of our shows, or at least the most recent ones, on the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, which WrestleCopia.com. In addition to every single podcast app in the U.S. I can think of. We're on all of them. We're also on YouTube, which I don't care about. But Bob, you could really monetize that YouTube and make some. No, I'm not interested. I'm not going to put videos up. I'm only putting a placard of our logo. That's it. It's for those who. I'll tell you what. I discovered wrestling podcasts through YouTube, not through podcast apps. The first podcasts I ever listened to were tuning into YouTube. That's where I discovered the whole milieu. So as for me, that's where you can find us. Every app I can think of, and YouTube, and our website, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where you can learn all about the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club, where for a nominal fee, you can help perpetuate the ongoing adventures of this program and the Outdated Entertainment Hour, which I'm very proud of. We've had some great episodes. Brian R. Solomon and me talking about B-movies. Oh, man, did I have fun with that one. And the response we've gotten to both that and the one we did about toys and the baseball show. Actually, I think we got half that response because I put a picture of a pretty girl on Facebook touting both of those programs. And we put them on, the baseball one was like a bonus episode. We just threw that out there real quick. And I'm glad I did because, you know what, things are going along really well for the Entertainment Hour. And I really, truly appreciate you all following us over there. And tell your friends, if they're not into wrestling, maybe they would like the Entertainment Podcast. And again, that's everywhere you get your podcasts. So, okay, I think I've got my commercial announcements out of the way. Our song, Funky Bone, our theme song, which is performed by Moran Ron Barron, also known as MRB. What a talented musician. I get so many plaudits over the theme song. And again, I want to reiterate, we play a short version in the beginning and the entire thing at the end. Because people seem to like it, I'm not getting any complaints. You know how it is with podcasts. When the end theme comes in, you can just log off if you want. But I used it to play around and listen to it in my car. That's how much I love that song. Nothing like a good funky instrumental to get your blood flowing on the Long Island Expressway. So anyway, I think that's it. My name is Bob Smith. We will be back in 1 week's time with some more old school wrestling excitement, hopefully. Something like that. We'll pollute your airwaves for another hour. How's that? It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. In the words of Ringo Starr, peace and love, brothers. I can't help but still believe in that. Gotta believe in that.